Hello.
Hey.
I am Alex.
I am Val.
And we are in At the End.
A podcast about The Sopranos.
Yeah, we talk about Sopranos. We're here again. 8th episode of season 5, Marco Polo.
Yeah.
Michael Imperioli's last written episode.
That's so sad.
It is, yeah. We'll still see him as Christopher, though, so it's okay.
Yeah. I like when characters who write or direct episodes appear in those episodes.
Right.
Like we had some good Steve Buscemi last episode.
Right.
Who directed.
Just showing up for like a second as
Yeah,
he's
he
directing
was
the episode.
in nothing. In this one, we have Christopher, like, at the barbecue.
Right. Yeah.
That's it.
That's about it. Yeah.
And his mom getting wasted, I guess.
Right. We see more of Christopher's mom than Christopher.
Yeah, totally. So I always find that interesting. Like, I can't imagine being a writer or a director and, like, having to put myself in those moments. It's really funny.
Right. Totally.
But yeah, this episode's called Marco Polo.
It is called Marco Polo. And the biggest development that happens in this episode for the entirety of The Sopranos is Carmela and Tony kind of having this moment of getting back together. So
Are they back together?
Well, at this point is no, but they do get together
I
to
see.
use some,
Some really cool innuendo.
to use some very cool innuendos.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that is big. Why do you think this episode is called Marco Polo?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously they are playing the game of Marco Polo is one. I mean, in the most like literal basic sense. Mm-hmm.
I think there's like a lot of Michael Imperioli's episodes, there's talk about what it means to be Italian.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Marco Polo being an Italian explorer.
Right. Yeah.
And a famous Italian who, I don't know what he did really.
He discovered lands. He did stuff with the cons. Seems to be informed greatly by watching 2 episodes of Marco Polo on Netflix before giving up.
Oh, shoot. I don't think I even watched those.
He was in Venice. Then he went to the Orient, as they used to call it.
Right. That sounds about right.
He wrote
Okay.
books. He wrote diaries of his exploits and his travels that then were read at later days, which gave insight into the cons.
The Silk Trade?
The Silk Road.
Silk Road?
Clearly, this is not something that we should be discussing on our podcast, as we
Yeah.
are not experts. But
I wish I did know more about Marco
Right.
Polo, because I do think that there is a sense in this episode of characters kind of like trying to explore new territory, and some of them doing it more successfully than others. Like, I think Carmela kind of puts herself out there to try to have this party in this moment
Yeah.
without Tony there. Like, she's kind of taking a step forward. This is the first time that would have been a thing,
Yeah.
that Tony wouldn't have been there at this party. And so she's kind of like trying to move forward,
yeah,
but there are these things that are holding her back, and her parents, both of them, are holding her back mostly in this episode.
yeah,
Yeah, and then I think it just like generally ties into the, like I said, the conversation about Italianness in this episode with the Figolis,
mm-hmm.
Dr. Figoli and his wife, and these like different types of Italian people.
Right. Yeah, totally. I guess I'm just trying to think of the people who are actually playing Marco Polo. I guess it's Artie at first, and then we have Carmela, but they're both like blind characters, kind of like searching for someone to. I'm just thinking of like all of the connotations of the title, because it definitely does seem more than just the fact that they're playing a silly water game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe even, like, I'm trying to think about it in light of the conflict in this episode, right? With, like, the New York mob.
Mm-hmm.
And, because we see Johnny Sack briefly at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
With his Italian car.
Yeah.
And then we have this, kind of like ongoing conflict between
Yeah.
Tony and Phil Leotardo.
Mm-hmm.
We have some of the like other New York gang, right, with like Rusty and Will Carmine and Angelo.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
We
could stretch.
Yeah, we have Tony blend. Yeah, it is in a degree, but it's also getting into kind of the themes of what characters are doing in this episode. I mean, we do have Tony Blendetto having like a pretty major character change in this episode.
Yeah.
Starting off not wanting to be involved in this hit and changing his mind after the party, and his son is involved in stealing something from AJ because of his jealousy around the house.
Yeah.
So he is kind of like venturing into old territory, but also new territory for
Yep.
him as a character for us.
Yep.
And he's also bringing in the New York mob by involving himself as a primarily New Jersey character, member of the New Jersey mob, and in a way that we haven't really seen before, where now somebody who is a part of Tony's kind of core circle is now being involved and actually doing something very consequential with the New York family.
Yep.
So we can imagine that we're kind of in new territory there because it's involving and activating the New York mob against New Jersey, possibly, in a way.
Yeah, although I don't think he is thinking about that.
Yeah, no,
Right now.
of course not. Of course not. But you're right. I think there are a lot of characters who are experimenting with new territory or are in new territory.
Yeah,
like even
even
Johnny
like-
Sack, like you said,
I was
like
gonna
with,
say Angie Bonpensiero.
yeah, Angie Bonpensiero at the auto body shop, who's running things. Johnny Sack buying this car, and they're talking about, wow, you're spending like the boss. He's kind of filling in these new shoes. Mm-hmm. He's acting in a new way. It is interesting. There were some other things that I was thinking about too, like people maybe being discontent with where they are as people as well. There was a couple examples.
Was Marco Polo discontent with where he was?
I guess so. I mean, why else would he leave Venice and
Right.
go see the...
Right. Yeah, we know so much about Marco Polo.
This is good that this is like the focal point of the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just structure it around a very vague, probably extremely
Yeah.
historically inaccurate recollection
maybe,
of
maybe he's
an
not
Italian
even Italian.
explorer.
I don't know.
He was in Venice, according to a show.
Yeah.
Well, we apologize to all of the Marco Polo experts.
Well, it is interesting. Just before you go on to not talk about this, because we are going a little far with it. It's interesting with this Michael Imperioli episode that we have an episode Christopher, which
Yeah.
is like Christopher Columbus,
Yeah,
and then we have Marco
right.
Polo.
Exactly. So all of the episodes that that Michael Imperioli wrote were From Where to Eternity, Telltale Musadel, Christopher, Everybody Hurts, and now Marco Polo.
Okay.
And that's it. Those are his contributions to The Sopranos as a
lot.
writer. It's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Anyway.
Just the Christopher Columbus, Marco Polo. I don't know.
yeah.
You know.
Yes,
Those
something to think about. Something to think about. And that is a moment of consequence in the episode around that game. You know, everybody
Yeah.
kind of leaves. Who does Carmela find? She finds Tony.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're in this moment where they do kind of get back together.
I think you saved that for us just now.
I saved it?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay, let's move on. Let's never talk
Yeah.
about Marco Polo again. That was
Good.
very dangerous territory.
Yeah, good.
And so, okay, so what are your reflections then in terms of the two of them getting together in this episode?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like, it's when Carmela does kind of like put herself out there to be more independent.
Mm-hmm.
She refuses Tony's money
Yes.
in this episode, right? Which I thought
Actually,
was
multiple
pretty...
people refused Tony's money in the episode. So does Tony Blendetto. Like that was actually something that I think was kind of isolating Tony as well in this episode. That
Yeah.
probably maybe pushed him to act in certain ways throughout
No,
the episode
exactly,
because he
exactly.
can't assert himself and assert his power over others.
Yeah.
So that actually is
There was an overlap there, or whatever, like a tie in there for me with those two characters, both refusing Tony's money.
Yeah.
I can't think of someone else who did. Did you have someone else who did?
Those are the ones off the
Okay.
top of my head, but I think like you're
But-
right. Like I think
but
that
I
also
think, like-
asserts power for those characters as well
Yeah,
as a
and
lack
they are
of
like
power for Tony.
they're putting themselves out there, but
Yeah.
it's like at that moment that Tony's actually like more drawn to them
Yes.
or more like intrigued by them or
Yes.
something like that. Like, and it's interesting because we were dealing with last episode in Camelot, with Tony kind of coming to terms with like being manipulated and like how his father might have been manipulated before him. And so, and like kind of drawn to, like, we had those comments made about like, if you're with a powerful man, you have to treat them like they're powerful kind of
Yeah.
thing. And those two characters are two that are kind of going against that. Christopher, mind you, does also go against Tony in that way. He's maybe one of the only other characters that does that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought like that was interesting that it is at this moment where Carmela's kind of like, she seems pretty good. I mean, she's really flustered about this party.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, she is capable of doing that by herself, and she does do it by herself.
She completely does it by herself. A lot
later.
of people show up to help and are useless.
I mean,
be it Meadow, be it Tony Blundett. I mean, Meadow making a cake and basically just like stepping in and doing something that's not necessary, making a mess, showing up in her bathing suit. Tony Blundetto,
just dropping his kids
off, filming inappropriate things like Tony's fat stomach, Carmela's butt. Jinx. But nobody's, I mean, her mom, who has kind of this alternate agenda, who's pushing her in a certain direction. Her dad, actually, who has very strong opinions and is kind of showing his personality for the first time.
Well, that stuff, so that it tied in for me, like the power thing with Carmela, like the whole thing about whose house it is, right? And they talk about it, like, Hugh built this house.
Yeah.
Tony Blundetto is really jealous of the house. Hugh thanks Tony for having them over. Like, he's like, I won't be there if the man of the house isn't there. And then he thanks Tony, like, for having them, for hosting them at his home or whatever, right? So there is something about, like, homes as well for me, like, as this kind of symbol of power.
Yeah.
And to think, but yeah, like, Hugh definitely tries to shift Carmela's actions, just like Mary does too.
Yeah. Both in their own way. And I think for me, when I reflect upon Carmela and Tony getting together, I think in some ways it's Carmela probably acting out against her mother. Like, there's like a daughter-mother, maybe daughter-father dynamic that she's trying to play into. Hugh really loves Tony, and her mother really hates Tony, but really loves Russ and Lena Stegoli.
Yeah.
And calls her out for it. And she talks about being proud of her identity and how her mother can't accept that, how her mother is one of these self-loathing Italians. She comes up with this analysis for her. So for me, there's an aspect of her acting on that in a way that she can exercise her power is to actually accept Tony's overtures.
Yeah, I don't know if it's hard to, like, read that moment in some ways. Like, definitely she is resisting Tony at first. And I don't think she's, like, consciously, like, making a choice being like, this is what I want to do. I think she kind of, like, gives into it. And he is kind of, like, you know, powerful. Like, he's pushed her up against this wall of the pool, and he's, like, big, and we have that image of his big stomach earlier, right? Like,
well, and actually there's a lot of focus on, like, Tony's size throughout the episode, even like him having trouble getting into Johnny Sack's car, even then, like, referencing Ginny Sack, like saying that Johnny saying, like, it's because of her knees, but, like, there's focus on body size too, and, like, Tony does come across as this, like, large force throughout the episode physically.
And then, you know, I think too, like, for Carmela, seeing Tony at the grill like that, like, she is really drawn to him, and she says like that would be the thing that she would miss at this party is if he weren't in the backyard manning the grill. And then that is when she kind of comes over to him and they have that beer. I mean, they get plastered.
Right. I mean, everybody seems pretty plastered.
It's it's a pretty fun 75th birthday party.
Pretty impressive, yeah. Hugh gets wasted, has to go home.
Yeah.
Artie wakes up on a chair, wearing a towel with, interestingly, like a towel around his face, kind of like a turban sort of thing or something. I don't know. There was some, like, they were talking about Phil Leotardo looking like the Shah of Iran, too.
I think you're being racist.
Well, no, I mean, I think they're being racist. I just think that there's some, like, weird kind of, like, racist overtones or something that maybe was playing in. Anyway, without getting too into detail, there was, like, a few images and topics that came up. That also Meadow talking about the justice system,
right,
and how it impacts people coming from Arabic-speaking countries. Yeah. Anyway, just another kind of bunch of stuff to throw in there. Yeah.
Well, they like Mike Imperioli likes to deal with these issues of race and identity and stuff like that. There's always some of that in his episodes. But what was I saying? What were we saying about Carmela and Tony? We're talking about body size.
Yeah, and the power of Tony over her. Yeah.
Oh, and they got plastered. Right. So
And they got plastered.
So they're definitely like, she didn't have as much power, even like when they threw her in the pool.
Yeah.
Right? Like Tony was able to basically like pick her up and toss her into the pool with AJ. Mm-hmm. And then there's that scene where they high five and then Ken ball in sync into the pool.
Yeah, sweet.
Sweet.
Sick.
So yeah, I don't know. I think for my reading of that scene is kind of
like it just kind of happens.
It just kind of happens. I don't really like. I like what you're saying about like it being a reaction to her mom and dad and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it just kind of happens. But this show deals with psychology on such a deep level. There's this like Freudian aspect of like those things are relevant even if they're not
absolutely
active.
Absolutely,
like they're just kind of like ruminating in the subconscious, and they would contribute to a decision like that or something.
No, I think that I wasn't really thinking about that, but I think that's really quite key to it. But I think it is also this kind of like nostalgia, right? And it is like by Carmela putting herself out there and saying, I don't want you to come.
Yeah.
She kind of had to figure out where she stands on that, right? Like it was other people who were pressuring her to make a decision either way. And then she, put herself out to make a decision on one end of it. And I don't think it quite felt right to her, even though she stated it, right?
I mean,
and so
her
then
mom was definitely guiding it in a certain direction.
She certainly was, and we understand later in the episode that what her motivations were for it. But then she was kind of swayed the other way by her dad being so upset. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely an impossible situation.
Yeah.
Like her mom and her dad are both coming down on her on opposite sides for their own reasons.
And I think, there's commentary too, like, the very beginning of the episode where they're in the hospital and Hugh's just fallen off the roof.
Yeah.
And Mary's like, in some ways it's really good. Like, you've been spared that, like her worry
it's really
and her,
messed up.
It's not nice.
Great. Advice.
Yeah. Her, like, to care that much about someone and see people get old and to worry about who dies first, but then we have it later in the episode as well where, Hugh's giving his little speech and, he says like, my bride, whatever, and kisses her on the face, and Carmela and Tony are looking at each other, right? So there is this like, we've been dealing with some morbid issues, like in the last episode, actually, like in Camelot too, we have the funeral of Nikolai and someone else.
It's okay, we don't need to know those names. Kinchetta, I think.
Kinchetta, yeah, good.
God damn it.
And we have mentioned to them like having this lifelong relationship and they can't live without each other. Like that there is something about Carmela and Tony where they really, like, even though they're separated, like, I don't know if they can really see their lives separated from each other. And it kind of goes back to something we've talked about before, which is like never really being able to escape the soprano I don't know, net or something like that, like this cloud that's kind of over them. But like, it's really impossible, I think, for either of them to see each other in that way. And there's another, Tony talks something about Carmela earlier in the episode too.
Tony's talking to Carmela?
He's talking about, someone asked him about his wife.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Maybe that was last episode.
Yeah.
Shoot. Anyways, we also have, like, I've been finding it interesting, and this is just not specifically about this episode, but I've been finding it interesting, Tony living in Livia's house and kind of the implication that has on him, because he's also really dealing with a lot of things about his own parents.
Yeah.
Just like Carmela's kind of interacting with her parents at this time. So
definitely. Yeah.
It's like more present in his psyche or something like that, I think, like based on him living there.
Right. And he's also back in therapy, right?
Right.
So, and for a while he hasn't been engaged in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he is being forced to confront that at a certain level through Melfi. Even though, like, the fact that we see Melfi so sporadically, so rarely, it does indicate that it's not really that important right now. But it is still there. He's not in the no man's land of having no kind of moral inventory.
Yeah.
As we were talking about last episode.
Yeah.
Also, when you're talking about him living at Livia's house, like we get a window into what his life is like right now.
Yeah.
And I think like the food in this show can represent different aspects of, well, a lot of things. They can symbolize where somebody's life is at, kind of what's going on. And I mean, we see Carmela walk in and we see Tony at home just waking up surrounded by Cool Whip, Burger King, Cheesy Poofs, cheese puffs. But there's something about that, like compared to what Carmela is able to provide for the Soprano home, that's so far apart. And it, for me, kind of ties into Tony's stature and that focus on fatness.
Yeah.
That's happening right now. Like he's being a bit of a glutton.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of excessively eating. He's out of control. There's no moderation and love and support and care coming towards him at this point in
What
his
about
life.
when he has the sausages around his neck?
Well, that's something that he's always done. The sausages are interesting because clearly it's important to him and Hugh. There's a scene, though, where it's nighttime. It switches to nighttime, and he's going around offering meats to everybody, and nobody wants it because everybody's already ate too much. So, like, for me, that was another example.
Like excess. It's on
It's
top
excess,
of what
yeah.
Carmela has prepared and what
It's kind of
Artie's
pointless.
prepared. And,
Yeah. So it's an example of another person at the party who's contributing, but actually not. It's actually
Yeah.
not that helpful. So he joins the club of Meadow, Tony Blundetto, all these people who are there ostensibly trying to help, but really are making it harder for Carmela. Because
Right.
Carmela is doing everything. We even see Carmela like kind of like mixing flowers as if she's baking, like as Meadow is at the pool.
I
Like-
think that is what that, or she's cleaning up Meadow's mess
Yeah,
anyways. Yeah.
exactly. So Carmela really is doing everything here, and yet not really getting all of the credit. Even Tony is still getting credit.
Totally.
But what is he really contributing to this party?
Yeah. I thought the other thing interesting about Carmela showing up at Tony's, as well as the food stuff, was that she brought him the newspaper. Because that's kind of like, you know, in a lot of our opening episodes of the seasons, we
Yeah.
have Tony going down the driveway and interacting with the newspaper in some way, right? Like going to
Right.
get
And wasn't this the season where in the first episode it gets driven over by Meadow?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
So I thought that was interesting that she brings him in the newspaper, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that like his life is really kind of is vastly different than what it used to be, right? And
Yeah.
and again, like the concept of like where you live being meaningful, or the house you live in being meaningful, and kind of those routines that you have.
Yeah.
I thought that kind of like her doing that was symbolic in some kind of way of like of representing that life that he used to have, right?
Right.
And then so then you see him when he's at the house, he's just behaving in the exact same way as
Right.
he used to when he used to live there. There's not like, you know, he
Right.
stays late, he's in the pool,
Yeah.
he's throwing Carmela in.
Yeah.
So it's just this kind of like sense of familiarity and comfort
Right.
too, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Kind of like Marco Polo coming home
To Italy?
to Italy. Or Christopher Columbus coming home to Spain. During that moment that you're talking about, there's some interesting kind of like camera movement.
Yeah, they're zooming in on their faces
Yeah, so
quite
it's
a bit.
there's still shots as they get there, and then as soon as Carmela brings up this issue, there's these very slow zoom-ins on both Carmela
Yeah.
and Tony.
Yep.
That for me kind of underscores the importance of this moment. The show constantly uses close-ups on people's faces to kind of indicate important moments, moments that are psychologically important for the characters, and I think this is definitely one of them. And so, yeah, it's interesting as they really take their time to zoom in. It really does kind of underline that this is an important interaction for me
Yeah,
in that
absolutely.
moment.
Sorry, we forgot to mention in people who aren't helping Carmela, Finn.
Finn is not very helpful.
No, he's like, "Do you have a towel?"
Finn's great. Love it. Love him.
Yeah. Meadow is so grown up.
She's doing great.
She's being a spoiled brat.
Yeah, not her best episode.
But she has such an intelligent conversation with Tony B.
Right.
And he's kind of like being weird and like
Well,
kind of like looking at
it's
her
an
in a weird
interesting-
pervy way.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Then,
I didn't get that.
yeah, there's something.
I was getting
maybe
like
it's kind of
his-
because we watch Trees Lounge. I don't know.
Right.
I'm like confusing my Steve Buscemi's, but I did get this like
Right.
I don't know. It was like the way he looked at her when she got there, and the way that she kind of like taps him on the back, like she kind of treats him in this bit
But
of
maybe
a
that's
flirty
also
way.
like he is missing Kelly, right? Because there's this
Yeah.
discussion about that. I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't know, there is this like weird, I don't know, at least for me, this weird underlying
Interesting.
sexual tension. Because then like when Tony comes over and she's sitting on his lap
Yeah.
and he's like tickling her,
Right, which is weird.
it's weird.
I thought I was watching Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah. I know.
There is something in that. I was thinking about just like Tony Blundetto's kind of diction and choice of words. He's kind of trying to come across as intelligent and is intelligent, but it's like kind of too much or something. Like the way he strings his
I think
sentences
Meadow
together.
is too much.
I don't know. It's actually like more relaxed for me. Like Tony Blundetto, the way that it's written, at least, is it seems very. I don't know. Like it's coming from a book or something. Like it doesn't have the like confidence and relaxed nature that like even. You're gonna hate me on this, but Meadow does have something that's just like less kind of put on or something. I don't know. For me, just the way that he talks, it's interesting, and maybe it's great writing in that it indicates that this is a character who had to teach himself through books on his own, and kind of writes in a like kind of like speaks in kind of like a classic English sort of way or something, because he didn't get a quality education.
I feel like that's how I feel like Meadow's like quoting a university professor that she likes.
See, for me, it's even more from Tony Blundetto. In that
Really?
scene where they're
Interesting.
talking, it seems like more organic from Meadow. I think it's deliberate. I think it's written that way. But it's just something that I was thinking about. And it's interesting because it makes sense. I mean, it would come out of Tony Blundetto's backstory.
And it would come out of Meadow being a pretentious
Just
Columbia fuck.
We're there. Meadows been decided on by Val. Val has a solid idea of Meadow.
I know, I used to like Meadow.
You used to like Meadow.
Don't like her anymore.
She goes through phases. I mean, at the end of season 3, that's like, wow, Meadow, you're doing great for Val. Val and Meadow could be friends at the end of season 3.
No.
No, not really. They couldn't be friends. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, Meadow.
I mean, Meadow, yeah, whatever. I don't want to talk about Meadow. She bothers me this viewing.
All right, let's talk about something else.
I want to talk about Junior.
Yeah, me too.
Why did Junior do that?
Well,
Is he just jealous? Is he like just like going again? Like I think there's a lot of ties with last episode.
I mean, I think he's
within
really
Camelot.
depressed. Right before he makes
Yeah.
the call, he talks about what do we live for, and for me, him calling and ruining the surprise party in some ways is what
Actually,
he's
he
living
says,
for.
"What do we live for?" when he's on the phone with you.
Oh, okay, so he's on the phone with you. But for me, like that kind of answers the question. What do we live for? Like that's all he has right now.
Yeah.
Is just kind of like taking other people down. Like it's a weird power
Yeah.
dynamic in its own way.
Yeah.
Where that gives him a certain degree of control over
Mm-hmm.
things that are important to other people.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, like, that we hear, like, before he gets on that call, he's watching this Italian movie, but he can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
He's really sleepy all the time, and Bobby's like, but, like, that's actually not, he's like, because of the medication. He's like, that's not a side effect of the drug.
Yeah.
Like, it's not supposed to make you sleepy. And then he says to Hugh, like, his family keeps him sedated.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Like, and then with last episode, too, with him crying at the funeral and stuff like that.
No, he's not in a good place.
He's really not in a good place.
Yeah.
He's in a really dark place.
He's almost kind of becoming the like de facto Olivia character. And there's some interesting things
Mm-hmm.
that happen where he says, it's surprise enough to wake up every morning.
Yeah.
Hugh then
And then
repeats
Hugh
that.
repeats it, yeah.
It's surprise enough to wake up every morning. And the way the shots work is right after he says that, AJ kind of perks up. There's like a very quick shot on AJ where that catches his attention.
Interesting.
And we've talked before about the like Livia AJ connection.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that AJ is receptive to and is probably growing into. It almost seems like it is that, as Tony calls it, this like rancid, putrid fucking soprano gene earlier on in the show. But there is this like propensity to depression and nihilism that AJ is kind of receptive to, and now Hugh is regurgitating coming from Junior.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, the connection between Hugh and Junior. I mean, we've never known about this before. This is not like...
Yeah.
But, you know, so maybe
They're
it's just
cool.
kind of like a tool in some ways. But I imagine, so what it's telling me is that they're about the same age. Right?
Probably, yeah.
Like, Junior's probably around 75 also.
Yeah.
And the difference between the lives of these two guys.
But they're friendly, and that's part of it. Like Mary is trying to
Separate herself
separate
from-
herself
yeah.
and kind of associate with these Henry Kissinger like doctor's family.
But they grew up on Arthur Avenue. Which is a great place.
Which is pretty cool.
We haven't been in a very long time.
We kind of want to move to Arthur Avenue.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we have Hugh, who's very comfortable with Tony and Junior, and is actually comfortable with his heritage.
And he's a construction worker, like, you know, and he's like, he's not pretentious.
Right. Yeah.
He's a bit of a chauvinist.
Definitely. He sure is.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, but Junior, yeah, I don't know. That was mean of Junior. I didn't like it. But I mean, the actor who plays Hugh, I don't know his name, but he had great faces in this episode.
Yeah.
like his eyes really communicate emotion.
Yeah,
in a really interesting way.
He's really good.
Yeah, it was really great.
There was also talking about like the relationship between men and women. I thought that was kind of playing in like the relationship that Hugh has to his wife and to Tony and Carmela, and the way that that's kind of passed down, and the way that men interact with women, and how there can be kind of like a power imbalance was playing out in this episode. Like Tony happy after he gets off the phone with Angie Bump and Sarah, she's in this shitty situation that she can't win, but Tony kind of yells about some stuff and then turns off the phone and he smiles, like he's happy to be in that position of control over her. And I think that plays into some of the other things that we've been talking about in this episode, like some of the male characters are happy when they can kind of exercise that control over women. And Carmela is kind of an example of somebody who's kind of powerless and kind of just being blown around a lot.
I think I think you're understating the power imbalance between men and women pretty heavily, but I won't go into that too much. But that's okay.
No, I mean,
but I think one of the things that in this episode that like highlighted that for me was when Tony was at the Bing, like looking through a book of strippers,
right?
Like of their like applications or whatever, like
exactly,
just kind of like flipping through these half naked or naked women, and I thought that was definitely an interesting choice.
Yeah, that's a good pickup. Like I think there's a lot that comes up in this episode that's like kind of around that theme. That's kind of reinforcing that idea.
Yeah, but we do have the character of Angie, like even though she isn't in like a great position now. Yeah. And you know, she is like we think, you know, first we think like she's taken over the auto body shop herself, but then we see like actually Pussy's brother is also there helping her, and he actually sounds a lot like Pussy. They have the voices of the characters are actually quite familiar, which is good. But we do have her she is kind of trying to take charge of her own life in some way. She's still under Tony's kind of thumb in a lot of ways. I'm sure, you know, she's paying money to them and stuff like that.
I mean, she even says, like, you know, it was really nice of you to give it to me, even with all the other business you do here. And then Tony's like, oh, and then, like, walks away. Yeah. So we actually don't get a window in other than
but we know that there's something. Yeah. But, you know, like, she is, like, she's a different character than she was when we last saw her selling sausages at the supermarket.
Yeah. Totally. Absolutely. Sausages.
More sausages.
How about the last scene? Tony Blundetto accepting
and carrying out the hit.
So we see him once he's about to go do it, actually after the party. Speaking of what characters are doing after, he's kind of stirring this orange Metamucil drink, so signifying death for me a little bit. Going into this orange juice, that's actually Metamucil. So I guess he needs fiber, but there's also death on its way.
Or it could be like Tang.
Could be Tang.
Like fake orange
But it's like
juice.
that even plays into it. It's like he's having these like aspects of jealousy come out over the Sopranos' wealth and opulence. And it's like a cheaper version of the orange juice that we've seen signified at the Soprano house so many times in the fridge.
Yeah.
So I thought that was actually pretty cool. And then there's like a lot of moments after the hit, the car with Joey Peeps, like the way it goes forward and hits the car in front of it is exactly the same as the car going in Phil Leotardo's car earlier in the episode, going forward and hitting the other car. And without giving away things, there's maybe even another hit coming up shortly in the season where there's another car that goes forward and hits another car. So there's actually like a lot of that collision kind of thing happening, which was interesting. Something that kind of some connective tissue between a bunch of different things happening.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he does a great job with this hit.
No, it's not great. Doesn't go great.
He gets his foot run over.
That's not good.
It's not great for him.
No. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, maybe things will actually go great for him. What else? Anything else? I had a few just like little things.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, again, I saw a lot of connection between last episode and this episode. I feel like they're kind of like a duo episode. I thought it was interesting how in the beginning of the episode, Johnny Sack says it was his dream to own a fine Italian sports car. And it reminded me of last episode with JT and his car. And when it was getting taken away by Chris, it was a BMW, I think. So it wasn't an Italian sports car.
Right.
But when Chris took his car away, he said that it was his dream car.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like, who are the people who win and have these symbols of power, and who are the people who lose in those scenarios?
Yeah.
And then I also like the way that Lil Carmine says that the painting in his new house is a trompe l'oil.
Great French.
Yeah, he's amazing at French.
Trompe l'oil.
Trompe l'oil.
Wow, what a cultured guy.
Yeah, he's super cultured.
He's great.
Yeah.
I like the phone call between Carmela and Tony, where Carmela does kind of change her tune the day before.
Well, she's asking him to come.
Yeah, she's asking him to come. There's some interesting shading on both of their faces, kind of like black and white, sort of like we've talked about going all the way back to season 1. Mm-hmm. There's like kind of like two sides to this issue, and we're not actually exactly sure how it's going to line up, but also just the two of them on the phone, which has been another symbol that we've discussed.
Yeah, well, we had a lot, like, it was interesting with the phones in this episode too. Well, and just like like when Carmela was doing this party, she was kind of just like inundated with, there were phones ringing, there were timers going off on the food, the doorbell was ringing incessantly, like there was all these things kind of calling her.
Yeah.
Like Marco Polo.
Yeah. Marco Polo just had too many phones.
No, like these things that you're like that are calling, I don't know, these things that are calling you, right? They're like calling your attention, and the only one that she can actually go to is Tony.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that can actually like suck her in, right?
Yeah.
There's all these competing things. But yeah, there was a couple moments in the episode where there's just like all this stimulus.
Yeah, totally. Right? Mm-hmm. Well, those are my stray observations. Are those your stray observations?
Those are my stray observations.
Well, we are progressing through season 5.
I know.
Next we have season 9, episode
9. Yeah, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 5 more episodes.
That is the order of numbers.
Yeah, I was trying to count.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we're almost there. Thank you for listening. We love doing this. We hope you love listening.
Or at least like it.
Or at least have moderate feelings about it.
Yeah.
Have mixed feelings.
I sometimes have mixed feelings about this podcast.
Yeah, well, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.